Hello, my beautiful butterflies. We're gonna be doing a what I read in February. I read so many books. I read 16 books, like paperbacks, and I read 3 books on like my computer. So let's get right into this. Let's start off with the first book I read. I'm gonna just tell you guys the books I read in order. So the first book I read was Freed by Elle James. I just picked up this book because I went to Target and there was like no other book, nothing was there, and I did really love the 50 Shades of Grey movies, so I bought Freed. It was really, like, I would say a 3-star read. It was really good, very comparable to the movie. There's nothing really that I could say to it. It's what got me into reading again. After I read that book, I went and picked up 50 Shades Darker and I read it. This is the second book in the series. It's actually my favorite movie and my favorite book. Also a 4-star read. I really liked it. I don't know. These were just like very basics read. Like they were like basic good books. I guess probably because I watched the movie already. I did read the first book, but I didn't like keep the book or anything. I rented it from the library, and these I actually bought. After I read those 2 books, I really liked Elle James' writing style, so I went and picked up The Mister. I read The Mister. I would give this a 2.5 star. Honestly, it was an okay book. It's basically about this girl who came from this place and she started working cleaning houses, and she like fell in love with the guy of one of the houses she cleaned, and he found her very intriguing. She was a virgin, all that, like, you know, it was just very basic. It wasn't hard to get through, but it wasn't like keeping me like, oh my god, I love this book. It was very Then I read the book Neon Gods. It's Persephone and Hades. I don't know how to pronounce her name, but honestly I gave this book a 3.5 star because it's a good book. It's easy to get through, super interesting, but I feel like towards the end they rushed the ending and they made it super predictable. Yeah, so it's not like my favorite thing in the whole wide world, but it was a good book. Like, I would recommend this book if someone asked me for a book recommendation. Then I read Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas. This is a 2-star read for me. A lot of people love this book, and I went like into reading this book with such high expectations, but all my expectations were shattered because I feel like the characters that were writing like letters back and forth to each other were so different, like completely different from the actual characters once they met like together. It just didn't really add up or connect to me, in my personal opinion. There were some really great scenes, but it just wasn't like a book that I'm like, oh my god, you must read this book. Then I read Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. This is a 5-star read. I love this book. I talked to everyone about this book. I was like, if you've never read this book, you have to read this book. You have to read this book. Like, oh my god, this book made me cry. Like, I read this book and I cried, and it's not because it has a bad ending or anything. It just really had me hooked, and I was really surprised with the twist. I was like, oh, that's the twist. And I also love me a brother's best friend, like, love story romance book. Get yourself this book if you haven't read it. Then I read the book Crave by Tracy Wolff. It's a really good book. I would give this book a 3.5 star. It's a YA book. It was like the first YA book that I had read. It was really good. It had me hooked. I did put it down, like spend a couple periods of time without reading it because like it kept me hooked at certain parts, but I was super bored at other parts, and I guess it's because this is a series book. There just has to be like a lot of like groundwork to kind of just establish what was going on. I do have Crush and Covet here, but I haven't started to read them. I just haven't like been so intrigued to read them, but I did read Crave. Then I read my first book online because when I read Crave, I was in DR and I didn't have a different book to read, so I read a book called Vicious. It was a 1-star read. I mean, like, I read it in like a couple hours. Like, I stayed up all night and I read it, but it was just so bad in my opinion. Like, the story was good, but it was bad because it's like I didn't understand why the girl was with the guy, because he was so mean to her. Like, there wasn't like any reason for her to like love him, and the type of shit he did was just horrible. So to me, it was just like, and the story was just so rushed and like weird. Like, it was just not good in my opinion. I read The Inheritance Game. This is a 4-star read for me. I really love this book. A lot of people say like they couldn't put this book down. My personal opinion, there were parts where I got like bored, but it's also because it's the first book in the trilogy, and they had to do like a lot of groundwork. But if you love Knives Out, this is a book for you. I loved it. I really love it. I'm super excited to pick up the second book, but the reason why I haven't picked it up is because I have this one in paperback and they only have the second book in hardcover, so I'm waiting for it to come out in paperback so that I can purchase it. And then the third book comes out in August, so I'm super excited for that. But yeah, I bought The Inheritance Game. It's a 4-star read. Totally recommend it. Then I read this book I bought at Barnes & Noble called Sinner. This is a 5-star read. This is the first book that I actually like tabbed. It's basically about this girl. She is supposed to be a nun, and the woman at her convent, is that what it's called, told her that she needs to go and like test out the world before she like, you know, commits. And she reunites with this guy that she knows through her brother, and she asks him to have sexual intercourse with her, and it's like a whole story. It's so good. I love this book. There are 2 other books in this series. There's Priest, and then I forgot what the other one was called, but it was a 5-star read for me. I was gonna pick up Priest, but I didn't get to pick it up. I probably will pick it up, but sometimes when I like buy books that are like this and they're like standalone but series, I don't like to like learn about the other characters in the series for some reason. It just doesn't intrigue me. But the next book that I read was King of Battle and Blood. It's basically about this vampire king named Adrian and this soon to be queen human, Isolade. And the vampire king is like taking over, and he decides that in order for there to be peace, that he wants to marry Isolade, and her father says yes. She moves in with him. She's supposed to kill him, but they end up falling in love, and there's a twist, and I was just like, oh. But then towards the end, you kind of start to guess because they throw too many hints. But at first I was like, what? Yeah. But this was I would say 4-star, 3.75 to be exact. Like, it was a really good book, but it wasn't like an astonishing book, like out of this world. But it was good. Like, it was a really good book. Then I read Scars He Gave Me. It's a book I found on Amazon, and I gave it a 3.5. I read this book on my laptop. The plot was okay. It was predictable. It was basically about these high school lovers who he left her behind, and they re-met 10 years later at her wedding night. And yeah, but it was so like, it felt so rushed. Like, everything was happening like this, the forgiveness, the them being together, the them breaking up. Like, it was just so like it was just too basic. Right after that, I binged these 2 in like one night. I read a book called Sweet Cruelty. I gave this book a 2-star. It was very interesting. It was easy to get through, but the plot was just like very basic. It was basically this girl, she was a librarian, and he's like a bad guy, and she knocked on his door by mistake, and he ended up like raping her, but it was like not really rape, but it was rape because it was non-consensual, and they just ended up like being together. It was really like weird or whatever. Totally not my style of book, but it was really like easy to get through, but it wasn't like a crazy amazing book. Then I read the best book. I love this book. I'm obsessed with this book. This book is a 5-star read. I read The Fine Print. Oh my god, Rowan and Zara are so cute. This book is like the perfect mix of you know, like slow burn but good. Like, it's not the type of slow burn where you're like, okay, but like, when's it gonna start? But it's just so good, and it's like really like insightful, and you know, like, it didn't need something crazy for the main character to have, but you know, like, you saw his imperfectness and what like he had to fix and how he was for her, and it was just like grumpy sunshine. I love it. I'm obsessed with this book. Pick this book up. It's like the hot version of Disney, like oop, but still Disney. I just can't say enough about this book. It's one of my favorite books in the whole wide world. Then I read, oh my god, I wanted to read this book so bad, and I finally found it. Promises and Pomegranate. At first I thought it was like Persephone and Hades, but actually it's kind of like the girl's version, like the human version of that. It's about this girl named Elena and this guy named Kyle. And basically, she was supposed to marry this other guy. It's a mafia story. She was supposed to marry this other guy, but he ended up marrying her instead. And you kind of see them start like living together, and they're like she's falling in love, he's falling in love, but they're not admitting it to each other, and it's like they're not admitting it to themselves. And then she finds out some crazy shit that I was like, oh. And you know, they end up breaking up, but they end up getting back together. It's a really good book. I would give it 4.5. It's not like a 5-star crazy good read, but it's a really good book, and I would totally recommend it. And I tapped the life out of this book because every page was like so interesting to me. It's like there wasn't one boring page in this book. There wasn't 1 second of this book that I wasn't interested. Then I read The Deal. This is another 5-star read. Garrett Granham is chef kisses. I love this book. It was perfect, like slow, like perfect little bit of slow burn with like just straight to the relationship. It was so good. I was super hooked. This is part of the off-campus series. I had read one of the books from the Briar U series, but I'm not going to be picking up the rest of the off-campus series. A lot of people have mixed reviews about it, and honestly, I'm not a person who likes like books that are like standalone books you could read but have like books in a series, because I feel like the other books in the series are going to have kind of like around the same plot, and I just won't be interested as much. I did tab this book. I love tabbing books. I tab like most of my books. But yeah, it was a 5-star read for me. I love this book. At first I thought it was going to be a mafia book, but it's not. Then I finally brought myself to read the book. Okay, so I had started to read it, but then I gave up because I found out that like there was like some like hurtful things that happened in this book. But this was a 5-star read. I cried during this book. I thought it was going to be like a love triangle, but it really wasn't. And it's just so emotional and like insightful, and you just learn so much about like abuse in relationships and what that's like, and you like see both perspectives. And I just loved this book. Colleen Hoover is such an amazing writer, author. Like this book was 5-star. If you haven't read it, read it. It's so worth every single second, minute, ounce of hype it got. I'm just so obsessed with this book. Then these are the last books that I was able to read in February. I read the Hunting Adeline series. So apparently this book was so bad it got banned. But when I went to go buy it, it was already back. It's a really hefty long book. It's about this girl, and it's about basically this girl who's a writer, and she moves into her grandmother's mansion, and then she gets this guy who becomes her stalker, but he also saves women and children from trafficking. And it's super like, because she gets he rapes her. He really does rape her. Like he does, but she likes it. Like it's really weird, but it was so good. It was a 5-star read for me. I was hooked on this book. I could not put this book down. I couldn't put it down to the point that I automatically like purchased the second book because it's a duology. The first book ends in a cliffhanger, and you're gonna have to read the second book to like finish. But at the end of book 1, something happens to her, and you kind of see in the second book she starts to recover from it. And basically she's raped by somebody else that isn't him. That's all I'm gonna give to you guys, or by multiple other people, and you just see kind of like the trauma that she faces. It's a very trigger warning book. Like to be able to read it, it's really hard to read. Like it's really hard to get through like those pages where you see what's happening to her, but then you see how he heals her and he helps her through it, and it's just so amazing. I give both of these books 5 stars. I am obsessed. I would reread these books, but they are hefty books. And that was it for my February reads. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm so excited to start reading the books that I'm going to be reading in March. And yeah, bye guys.